Hello, hello. So I'm going to give a quick 10-minute talk about a project I'm working on, and then I'm going to introduce a panel discussion on sport and sustainability. But first, hopefully this works. I'm going to talk about sustainability as a matter of survival. Often we talk about sustainability as something that is necessary for the planet, but the reality is there are many people in our communities that don't have the opportunity to be sustainable. For 20 years, like the young activists you just saw on stage, when I was a late teenager, young adult, I decided that architecture needed to make a difference. So I spent the next 20 years working in post-conflict and post-disaster reconstruction, building schools, clinics, sports facilities, and housing for communities in need. And after that career, I came back to the States. And I found something else that was a problem. While I was looking at social and sustainable issues around the planet, there was a much bigger crisis in the United States. That is of gun violence. So you don't often hear about mass shootings in America because they happen every single day. And you don't often hear about gun violence in America because it happens every single day. It's pretty an appalling statistic that at least a dozen people have to be shot in order to make the news in the States. And to give you an idea about gun violence in the States, over 300 people every day are shot. And if you look at the ownership of guns, more than 40% of the United States owns guns, and 9% own more than 5. The other conversation that's been happening recently is about school shootings, and it's no mistake in knowing that when you look from 2015 onwards, we've actually had a higher percentage of school shootings than in the last 40 years. So I have a teenage daughter, and I don't worry about her classes, her education, her exams. What I worry about is getting a text from her saying that there's a school shooter. This is something that almost every parent in America thinks about, because the number of incidents of people taking guns into schools or threatening to take guns into school is rapidly increasing. So this sounds very depressing. And it doesn't sound like an issue that has anything to do with sustainability. But actually it does. Because right now in the United States, there are 396 million guns in the hands of US citizens. That does not include law enforcement of military. That's another 50 million guns. The most shocking thing of that statistic is not that there are more guns than human beings in the United States, but over 48 million weapons were bought during COVID. So when COVID happened and we had the lockdown, the first thing that most Americans did was arm themselves. 7 million Americans for the first time bought weapons during COVID as a way to protect themselves. And I'm here in Portugal, and you say, well, this has nothing to do with Europe, and it has nothing to do with Portugal. But actually, believe it or not, there are 2 million guns in Portugal, of which 50% are unregistered or illegal. Portugal also has the highest number of gun deaths in Europe per capita. But more interestingly, unlike the United States, almost 75% of gun deaths in Portugal are as a result of suicide, and 90% of gun deaths are men. But in the United States, it's astronomically more. An African-American male has 172 times chance of being shot than anybody in Europe. So what do we do about it? I'm a designer, I look at design problems, and I think of this as a supply chain issue. Of the almost 400 million guns in the United States, 500,000 are actually decommissioned and ready to be destroyed. So if you're a designer that thinks about supply chain issues, you have access to metal. So working with musicians, we decided to turn guns into musical instruments. and to fund music programs. So what we do is we take guns, assault rifles, AR-15s, handguns, rifles, we smelt them down into raw ingots. We then work with musical instrument manufacturers to turn them into working instruments, and then we distribute them into schools. So what you see here is actually the smelting down of thousands of weapons that we collected from the LAPD. Those weapons were then turned into ingots, and those ingots were turned into trumpets, trombones, and other instruments. Last year, we started making these. Interestingly enough, the manufacturer is based in Germany, so we're literally exporting melted American guns to Europe to make musical instruments to then send back to America to give to Americans. And to give you just a flavor, I'm a designer, not a musician, but you can actually hook this up and you can play it. And as of this year, we're also doing guitars. Now, we want to expand the number of weapons that we're turning into musical instruments. We want to expand music programs in schools and also expand to other countries. Now, why am I talking about this in a sustainability conference? If you're in a community where your number one threat is gun violence, you can't think about recycling, right? You can't expect a community to think about saving the planet when their own species is at threat. So we have to figure out how can we combine the solutions of sustainability with systemic social issues. We can't just put on big events in New York and say that we're saving the planet. We have to look at the social issues that are right here, right now, and figure out how do we come up with sustainable solutions for them. Here in Portugal, which I love about Portugal the most is you're one of the most transparent nations in Europe, and you report everything. And one thing you report is that 37,000 weapons in Portugal every year is destroyed by the government. But you don't do anything with it. So one decision by one politician could say, we're going to take every single one of those weapons, we're going to take the stockpile of military weapons that are currently being put aside for future wars. We actually, here in Portugal, decommissioned weapons are stockpiled in case Portugal goes to war with somebody. I don't think Portugal should be going to war with anybody. We could take those weapons, we can turn them into musical instruments, and we could create orchestras around the world. My point is, it doesn't matter if you're interested in tackling gun violence, if you're interested in tackling waste management, if you're interested in tackling sustainability and energy systems, the most important thing is that you design like you give a damn. Thank you.